around the world are being persecuted.
Vous savez que l'organisation de l'État islamique a décapité des Irakiens, des Syriens, des Occidentaux, des journalistes. Condamnez-vous ces actions?
I support what happened. It's our way of execution, not by shooting or hanging. This is the way we kill.
They say they are considering leaving to Iraq or Syria to join the Islamic State organization.
I'll go. It's our duty to migrate to the countries where Sharia is being implemented.
He says that the severe repression against Islamists in Egypt is pushing many into the arms of the extremist group.
I think that what the Egyptian army did with the Islamists in Egypt, like those massacres, that's stupidity from their side, and it's helped convince many to join the ranks of the Islamic State organization.
One Egyptian has already taken action. Ahmed al-Darawi, a former policeman and candidate for parliamentary elections in 2011. According to jihadist websites, he joined the ranks of the Islamic State organization and was killed last May during a suicide attack in Iraq. Reached by phone, his brother confirmed to us these details, yet his family says they were not aware of his involvement at the time. The news worried many Egyptians. They fear a rise in extremism in the region could influence Islamists in their own country. According to the Minister of Interior, some 600 Egyptians have joined jihadist groups in Iraq and Syria, but these numbers are difficult to independently confirm. A few weeks ago, some individuals linked to the Islamic State organization were arrested inside Egypt.
We've arrested people who went to Syria, fought in Syria, and returned to Egypt. 3 members were arrested, and we also stopped attempts to recruit Egyptian citizens to travel and join this organization.
General clarified that Egyptian authorities do not make any distinction between the Islamic State organization, jihadists in Sinai, or the Muslim Brotherhood. For the Egyptian government, all of these groups are linked, and they are all considered terrorists. Egyptian authorities have been setting up a buffer zone along the border with the Gaza Strip to prevent the smuggling of people and weapons. Since the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood last year, hundreds of security forces have been killed by Islamist attacks in Sinai. Most of these attacks have been claimed by the Sinai-based group Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, which has declared its support for the Islamic State organization. And according to experts, these ties can grow stronger.
What we know with near certainty is that there's pressure from the base of Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis to pledge allegiance with the Islamic State organization. But the leaders of this group, based in the Sinai Peninsula, are, for now, not answering this call. They want to preserve their financial, organizational autonomy and their decision-making authority.
The Islamic State organization does not have a presence in Egypt, but sympathy towards the group is growing within radical Islamist circles. The Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, the most prestigious of Sunni institutions, says he is committed to the struggle against the Islamic State organization, which he says is tarnishing the image of Islam.
These crimes are terrifying, barbaric crimes, and those who commit these crimes must be severely punished. We've always said that this is a terrorist organization that does not correspond to true Islam.
One of the main challenges of Al-Azhar is to prevent the spread of radical ideology. Under the supervision of the Grand Imam, the Egyptian government recently enacted measures to regulate Friday sermons. Imams are now being closely watched.
We monitor their actions, and whoever goes outside of these guidelines and adopts speech that is prone to violence or terrorism, actions will be taken against them immediately.
Those who deviate can face a warning, a financial penalty, or the withdrawal of their license to preach. Now all of Egypt's state institutions are mobilized in the fight against terrorism. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has warned it will be a long and bloody battle. Tens of thousands of Islamists have been arrested since the summer of 2013. But human rights organizations blame Egyptian authorities for the massive repression, which could push even more Islamists towards extremism.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by my guest, Maha Azam, who heads the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, a Turkey-based body created in August by representatives of Egypt's opposition groups against the al-Sisi government. Its members include former ministers from the toppled Muslim Brotherhood administration. Hello, and thank you very much for being with us on France 24.
Thank you.
Why are so many Egyptians now attracted by extremism?
I think that what we're seeing is a closing of the political space for all Egyptians, not just Islamists. And so when there is persecution and repression throughout history, we've seen people turn to extreme measures. But the vast majority of opposition to the regime in Egypt remains peaceful. What we're seeing are pockets of young people, particularly in the Sinai, that have resorted to extreme tactics and are attracted by extremism as they are elsewhere. But I think it's important to point out that the opposition to the regime in Egypt, 99% of it remains peaceful.
And is your group fighting this radicalization and this rapprochement with the Islamic State organization?
Our organization is completely independent of any extremism and abhors the resort to violence. The majority of Egyptians and the young activists that were picked up only recently, 20 of them, are prone to arbitrary arrest, torture in the prison, and even shooting on their protests. So ultimately what we're facing in Egypt is the militarization of the state. And as our organization, the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, we are committed to peaceful protest at all levels, and we are a broad-based organization that doesn't only include Islamists, but a broad range of opponents against the regime.
And is there not a danger that the official rhetoric of linking all Islamists and terror could turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy, as it has in Syria, for example?
The danger is that the state, under the guise of fighting terrorism, then undermines and fights all civil liberties, attacks independent NGOs, and ultimately fights any free voice, clamps down on the media, on the freedom of assembly, which is happening in Egypt today, and commits arbitrary arrests and does not respect due process. So ultimately, in countries like Egypt, unlike in democracies, the fight against terrorism ultimately means the denial of civil liberties and the denial of all opposition to all parties.
Now, through your council, opposition politicians are engaged in resisting the al-Sisi government from abroad. How does that work?
Obviously, the resistance is inside Egypt, but there are those that have had to leave Egypt. There are Egyptians outside that are committed to the democratic process in Egypt. And ultimately, we want to expose the reality of this military regime that has overturned Egypt's first democracy, overthrew its elected president, and ultimately denies Egyptians basic human rights and respect for the rule of law. Outside Egypt, we feel that we may have a freer platform to express what is happening in Egypt and to give a clear message to the international community that dictatorship and the militarization of the state has returned to Egypt, and that the Egyptians will not accept this. They want their democracy back.
And have you secured any foreign support?
Have we found support where? Inside Egypt or outside?
Outside of Egypt.
Of course, outside Egypt. We are a broad platform. There are Egyptians throughout the world, across Europe, the United States, Australia, that are members of our organization. And we put our hand out to all Egyptians to fight this military regime and to expose it for what it is among civil society in the West, and to lobby their governments, Western governments, to stand by their values and by their security interests. In the long term, supporting a military regime is ultimately dangerous to the stability and security not only of the Middle East region but of the whole world.
And yet we're not hearing foreign powers condemn this.
Ultimately, countries like the United States and the UK and others and the EU should really be at the forefront of opposing the military regime in Egypt and calling for a return to real democracy. The roadmap to democracy that they supported, the roadmap that is promoted by General Sisi, has become a roadmap to the militarization of the state and the terrorizing of Egyptian citizens.
Maha Azam, thank you very much for having talked to us on France 24 on behalf of the Egyptian Revolutionary Council. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's where we're leaving it for this hour, live from Paris. But stay tuned, there'll be a full news update at the top of the hour with the latest from Burkina Faso, where the president has just stepped down.